We come across numerous star fortresses all around the world. They are called star fortresses because of their distinctive star-shaped multi-rayed design. According to official history, these fortresses replaced outdated castles as artillery developed. The first such fortress was a fort, reportedly designed by Michelangelo himself back in 1535. Since then, star forts began spreading triumphantly around the globe. However, questions for historians arise from these earliest examples. First, in reality, Michelangelo did not design or build this fort. Its architects were Donato Bramante, Giuliano Leno, and Antonio Sangallo Jr. Michelangelo only constructed one upper bastion, but despite this, the entire fort was named after him. Additionally, look closely at the fortress itself, at the walls and the bastions. Where exactly did historians see a star fortress here? This is a classic castle with stronger bastions. In my view, it has no real connection to star fortresses. Hello everyone, you're watching the Epoch of Mistrust channel with Mikhail Kalmykov. In this video, we'll begin exploring the story of the Star Fortress. Where this journey will take us, we'll find out by the end of the video. So, with the very first official Star Fortress, historians seem to have an apparent misstep. It turned out to be neither star-shaped nor truly Michelangelo's creation. It's also odd that its main architect, Donato Bramante, was in no way inferior to Michelangelo. Among his works are St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, the Tempietto in Rome, and Santa Maria presso San Satiro in Milan. In fact, he was appointed by Pope Alexander as the chief architect of the Vatican. So why is the fort at Civitavecchia attributed to Michelangelo? Furthermore, the Vatican itself is located within a massive star-shaped fortress. It has a classic star design, yet it appears to have been built before Michelangelo, Bramante, or any other well-known architects. Strangely, there is no exact information about its construction date, not on Wikipedia, nor on the official Vatican website, nor anywhere on the internet. But how can that be? Let's try to unpack this mystery. If the first star fortress in history was officially built in 1535, then we can consider this year as the starting point, before which no fortresses of this kind should theoretically have existed. Let's assume that the star fortifications around the Vatican were erected significantly later to strengthen its defenses against artillery fire. In fact, there are two star fortresses in the Vatican. One is the main structure, the Vatican Citadel, where St. Peter's Basilica is located, and the other is a smaller star with the classic medieval castle of the Holy Angel at its center. The rays of this smaller star now occupy the Adriano Park. This smaller fortress may hold the answer. First, the castle of the Holy Angel is located within it, and the theory that the defensive star walls were added later doesn't hold up, since the castle begins at the upper level of the star walls, not inside them. Second, the star walls themselves are only half a meter to 1 meter above ground level and are topped with earth for some reason. Of course, there's a moat in front of them, 3.5 meters wide, but it would not pose a significant barrier to attackers. Finally, and most importantly, defenders' artillery should have been positioned on the rays of the star to target enemy positions, which requires a clear operational area. At least 800 meters and ideally a couple of kilometers of open space. Yet, Dense residential development surrounds these fortresses. Moreover, any nearby house could serve as a perfect vantage point for targeting the fortress defenders. Historians and common sense offer the most logical explanation. The houses were built much later, in the 19th century, 300 years after the fortresses. Indeed, a closer look at the history of Rome's construction confirms this. However, I found one inconsistency. About 183 meters from this star, within the direct artillery range of the fortress, stands the Church of Santa Maria in Traspontina. It's positioned in such a way that it completely blocks the firing line, offering perfect protection against artillery located only 180 meters from the wall. But the key detail is its date of construction. The year 1566. That is just 31 years after our reference point. Right in the height of Star Fortress construction, I hardly need to explain that constructing such a building during the active use of star fortresses would have been an invaluable gift to any attacking force. Interestingly, the Vatican citadel, unlike the neighboring fortress, has normal dimensions and is much better suited for defense. Could it be that the builders initially thought to raise the walls to a decent height, then 300 or 400 meters later, forgot? Additionally, the fact that the fortress under the castle of the Holy Angel isn't widely recognized suggests that star fortresses may not be what we assume. It doesn't even have a proper name. It's just referred to as Adriano Park. Even Google Earth didn't bother to depict it in a three-dimensional model. There's a model of the castle, models of the surrounding buildings, every house around it, but no fortress. By the way, the word citadel originates from Latin, just like the Vatican citadel, Vatican City. The Latin cita literally means city. But I digress. Looking at the first two star fortresses, we find a strange silence about their existence. Now we have an official beginning and end point. We assume that no defensive structures of this kind existed before 1535, and by the start of the 20th century, they were no longer needed. This gives us a time span of roughly 400 years, and their existence is directly tied to artillery development. So, it's time to discuss artillery in particular. What is the main purpose of the star shape? How do these fortresses differ from classic medieval castles? Firstly, it's about absorbing the impact of projectiles with dense walls and causing them to ricochet off due to the angle of the walls. Additionally, the star-shaped rays eliminated blind spots, allowing for retaliatory fire in all directions. Moreover, this retaliatory fire came from the sides or flanking positions, ensuring maximum effectiveness. However, for this kind of flanking fire, two things are actually needed. First, the enemy must be close to the walls, which is risky, as they could attack the position once you move to fire. The walls are angled and sloping, especially when the fortress is made of earth rather than stone. Second, the cannons would need to tilt downward to hit the enemy without hitting the fortress itself. To my knowledge, medieval cannons could not be tilted sharply downward. After all, the angle would need to be fairly steep, around 20 to 30 degrees. And we know that the walls of star fortresses, while not especially tall, started at heights of 7 meters or more. So, although flanking fire might have been more effective than direct fire, in my view, it would be useful only once or twice at most, given the time needed to aim and reload the weapons. In modern warfare, with automatic weapons, such tactics work well, of course, but in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, hardly so. The limited effectiveness of these methods from an artillery standpoint is shown, for example, in the storming of Izmail by Suvorov in 1790. The basic facts: 32,000 soldiers attacked, 35,000 Turks defended. They were inside a star fortress, built according to the science of the time, with bastions designed to provide flanking fire cover. The numerical advantage was on the defender's side, leaving Suvorov seemingly without a chance. Yet the fortress fell after an assault, as Suvorov's and Mekhnob's battalions advanced straight along the walls, unimpeded by flanking fire. The fortress was taken in just over 3.5 hours. In the process, the attackers lost only 1,800 men, while the defending Turks lost 26,000. Secondly, there's another issue. The artillery that historians refer to when explaining the transition to the star-shaped design weren't simple field guns. These were enormous bombards firing heavy shells, and thus they aimed not directly, but in an arc. My point is that a shell flying into a fortress from above and hitting the angled walls would not ricochet, but would stay lodged in the wall, causing maximum damage. And anyway, why waste such powerful shells on a wall? The arc trajectory allows the artillery to fire directly into the fortress, bypassing the outer defenses. Once inside, they could wreak havoc, destroying buildings, food supplies, and ammunition depots. So the question arises, who exactly were these fortresses defending against? Some alternative researchers have speculated it was something that fired directly. Since cannons of that era weren't quite suited to this, given their relatively low power and short range, it was likely something wave-based, possibly a sound wave. Skliarov was the first to suggest this, and other researchers have come to similar conclusions in one way or another. Let's keep this theory in mind. It may help us understand things later. For now, let's turn to Russia. In the south, in the Rostov region, there's the so-called Annenskaya fortress, or Fortress of St. Anna. It's also star-shaped, and since it's here in our country, we decided to visit and see it with our own eyes.
The walls of Annenskaya Fortress. Yes. Annenskaya Fortress, its walls, moat, and remnants of building foundations. Under state protection. Well, let's see what exactly is being protected there.
My colleague Roman from the Global Question channel joined me on this visit. His video on this topic was published a bit earlier, and you can see his take via the link in the description. The fortress is located near the Starocherkasskaya station, about 15 kilometers from Rostov-on-Don. Approaching it, you wouldn't immediately realize you're near a massive structure.
Even standing next to the fortress or passing by, you'd never guess it's a fortress. It just looks like a few hills, nothing unusual. You might drive around these kinds of hills all the time. But once inside, it becomes clear that it's a fortress. So there you have it.
Even standing 50 meters away, it still just seems like some hills along the road, and that's it. Only after climbing them do you realize you're in a very unusual place. Huge earth mounds, about 8 meters high, conceal nothing. A flat, empty square where barracks, infantry, and cavalry were presumably stationed. However, if they were ever here, nothing remains, not even the foundations. Only from a bird's eye view can you faintly make out the outlines of former buildings. Vegetation now grows along the walls. A profound sense of desolation, silence, and deep loneliness overcomes you at this architectural monument, which is supposedly under state protection. Yet we saw no signs of state presence or any guards. The makeshift buildings, constructed a few years ago for filming, have long since disappeared. On the flat grassy space, wild watermelons and pumpkins grow. The slopes are scattered with the remains of badgers and foxes, while wild pheasants hop along the tops of the slopes, resembling miniature dinosaurs. The road leading to the fortress entrance is in such poor condition that it's only passable by tractor or off-road vehicle. That's why we had to make our way on foot. During our entire visit, we encountered only a couple of mysterious individuals unexpectedly out for mushroom hunting. A strange scene for an architectural monument, isn't it? Still, since the site is protected, it must hold some value, though perhaps not necessarily historical. Speaking of history, according to public sources, Empress Anna Ivanovna ordered the construction of this fortress in May 1730 as the empire's southern outpost. Just a year later, in 1731, the fortress was completed. Since Anna ascended the throne in February 1730, this was likely one of her first official decrees. However, despite thorough searching, I couldn't find the original decree or even a copy of it. Wikipedia doesn't cite the source for this information either. Out of curiosity, I looked up who added this information to Wikipedia and when. It turns out that the entry was made on January 25th, 2017. It was made by a user with the nickname Queske. Further investigation revealed that this user was actually Evgeny Georgievich Bogomolov. He has since passed away at the age of 65, so there's no way to ask him where he got this information. We know he was trained as a radio engineer and worked in space communications. He was one of Wikipedia's most active contributors. He wrote around 3,700 articles over 8 years and received numerous awards. And this person, who knew all the rules for publishing on Wikipedia, didn't cite a source for this. It is quite unusual. Other moderators edited the article later, but didn't add a source for the fortress's construction either. Could they have simply made it up? Maybe the answer lies in the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, but there's complete silence on this topic there as well. Considering the volume of articles published by this author over 8 years, along with his main profession as a radio engineer and subsequent work in the space industry, neither of which is related to history, I suspect this article, like many others, was generated automatically using a specially designed bot. After all, a person couldn't possibly produce an average of 1.5 articles per day for 8 years without weekends or breaks, while still working a full-time job. Writing even one article requires considerable time for research, verification, and formatting. It's simply impossible to maintain that pace manually. But a custom program could be developed to scan the internet for information and post it on Wikipedia under the author's name. This isn't just speculation, such practices are known to exist within Wikipedia. For example, the record for most entries belongs to another programmer who managed to publish over 1,370,000 articles. This suggests that a neural network developed by someone found some material online and posted it. That makes it nearly impossible to trace the original source. Most likely, this information might have come from a textbook, a little-known historical journal, or even the tabloid press. But perhaps there's another approach. Search once more carefully for this decree. After all, the time frame for its issuance is limited. 1730, the first year of Anna Ivanovna's reign. Not even a year, just the first few months or half a year at most. The Yeltsin Presidential Library website lists only 2 relevant books. The first book covers Anna Ivanovna's directives solely for the Chamber Collegium. In other words, how to determine who should pay taxes, how much they owe, and how to collect it. The second book contains her personal instructions to Semen Andreevich Saltykov. They also bear no relevance to our fortress. Eventually, I located a comprehensive list of Empress Anna's decrees, complete with dates and topics. And it led me to an interesting discovery. On June 1st, 1730, there's a decree establishing a commission to review and repair the state of the army, artillery, and fortifications. It doesn't specify the recipient, but the context suggests it was directed to Christopher Minnick, then Field Marshal and President of the Military Collegium. This decree from Anna Ivanovna is the only one within the relevant time frame that concerns military matters and fortifications. Historians likely inferred that this decree related to the construction of our fortress, thus forming the belief that it was built by order of the Empress. But there's more to consider. Firstly, the decree title refers specifically to the inventory and repair of existing fortresses, indicating maintenance, not construction. Secondly, that's just the title. Has anyone actually read the decree itself? What does the text say? It seems even historians may not have examined it. To my surprise, the text of this decree has indeed survived. In fact, it's still valid and is even included in the Garant legal reference system. So what does it address? It discusses the ranks for each regiment, the conditions of the officers, regimental horses, uniforms, arms and ammunition, provisions, pay, regimental records, corporal punishment, and hospital maintenance. Not a single mention of any fortress or fortified structure. Not a single mention of artillery either. That's it, the title includes both artillery and fortresses. But the text says nothing on the subject. With this, the search for the author of the fortress can be considered complete. We've located a full detailed list of Empress Anna's decrees. We identified the relevant decree and read its text. And that's it. The Empress did not build this fortress. Even if some repairs on the fortress were carried out under this decree, the nature of the decree limits such works to maintenance, not new construction. The fortress itself existed long before the Empress's time. So, based on the example of Santa Anna Fortress in the Rostov region and the Vatican citadel, we conclude that these structures existed long before their official invention. And the classic medieval castles were likely built upon these pre-existing fortifications. You can examine the history of hundreds of similar fortresses. Every time you dig a little deeper, you encounter discrepancies and, in the end, realize that these structures were built by unknown people at an unknown time. You could look at a 19th century artillery textbook that describes redoubts, bastions, ravelins, weapon layouts, casemates, and firing schemes. But when you examine each specific fortress, you realize the textbook is more fantasy than reality. Take St. Anna Fortress, for example. According to the textbook, there should be niches for the garrison on the inner side of the walls. Where are they? The walls are solid. And what about the outbursts? Were they meant for weapon placements? If so, why are there so few? Why don't they face all directions, leaving some bastion walls completely empty? Why are they located so deep in the ditch, positioned in such a way that firing downward would be nearly impossible? And why hasn't a single building survived inside the fortress? It never saw battles, so what destroyed them? Some might suggest they were simply dismantled. But that explanation is fit for a schoolchild. Any adult would understand that no one would dismantle usable buildings within a protected space. At the very least, they could be used for housing or even converted into workshops, trading spaces, or an entire village. Dismantling them, that's out of the question. It would require significant effort and labor. In this way, St. Anna Fortress challenges the technical foundation of artillery and even military science by its very design. It's not suited for defense, not at all. The question then arises, why is it built above ground at all? The Earth absorbs a nuclear blast, but that's about the only protection it offers. Such a fortress could easily be taken by advancing up its gentle slopes. And there's no need to conquer it through combat. Despite its imposing size, it's just a fortified square with no internal infrastructure. There are no living quarters, no catacombs, no water supply, no storage areas, no underground bunkers. There is absolutely nothing. You couldn't even shelter there from a simple rainstorm, let alone artillery fire. Surround it and wait for a week, and any garrison inside would die, not of hunger, but thirst. The idea that the interior buildings were somehow destroyed only makes sense on a superficial level. Even if the buildings were wooden, where would we find at least one well for water? Where are the basements? Where is the infrastructure? Did they really demolish every single structure so precisely and then fill and level the ground? If the buildings were such a nuisance that they were removed, why wasn't the fortress itself leveled to create arable land? After all, there are vast fields around it, and an extra 55 hectares of farmland would certainly be useful. But no, they removed the buildings yet left the mounds intact. In my previous works, particularly in the Mysterious City series and the video A Look into the Past, I used three-dimensional models to show how earth ramparts can form fortress shapes over actual fortresses buried deep underground. When mass deposits of clay and sand settle, they tend to mimic the contours of the underlying structure. Over time, water seeps through the soil, saturating and compacting the earth, which then begins to settle further, tracing the original shape. Moreover, my colleague Ostrogor from his own channel conducted an experiment to explore this theory. He created a miniature model of a fortress, buried it in sand, and found that the model supported our assumption. This gives us good reason to believe that a genuine fortress may be hidden under a thick layer of soil. We'll revisit this topic, but for now, let's look at a map of star fortresses across Eurasia. As we can see, there are a large number of fortresses, though their frequency decreases toward the east. yet they still reach as far as Omsk and Petrozavodsk. This raises a logical question. Why are almost all fortresses in Russia earthen, while in Europe they're primarily stone? And is that entirely accurate? To test my hypothesis, I reviewed hundreds of fortresses on the map and categorized them into two groups. The first group is conditionally abandoned, and the second is conditionally operational, meaning they appear maintained. This is a conditional label because even operational fortresses sometimes have earth ramparts later covered with stone or brick. It's not uncommon to find that the walls of a seemingly functional fortress, although stone, are only about 1.5 meters high, and they are low enough to step over. The Star Fortress at Adrian Park in the Vatican is one such example. Many operational fortresses also have an unusual layer of earth on top rather than a traditional roof. This mix makes it challenging to classify certain fortresses as strictly one type or another, but it provides a place to start. What I found was intriguing. The fortresses seem to follow specific regional patterns. Most of them are terrestrial. Moving eastward and southward, the proportion of earth ramparts increases. Moving westward, the proportion of fully functional stone fortresses rises. In Portugal, for example, the westernmost point on the map, almost all fortresses are stone. The same is true for Spain and much of the Atlantic coast, as well as Italy, Sicily, and the southern coast of France. Further east, in Slovakia, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Romania, there's still a substantial number of stone fortresses. However, as you move further east, the fortresses begin to sink underground, often appearing as earth trenches. And even further east, these trenches themselves go underground, with fortresses visible only as subtle landscape changes, sometimes detectable only by satellite. Moreover, it becomes evident that the stone fortresses, let's consider them functional, are generally located at higher elevations, sometimes up to 1 kilometer above sea level, while the buried fortresses are in lowlands and at sea level. There's a unique situation in Holland and Belgium. There we find the highest concentration of star fortresses. However, nearly all of these are terrestrial, as though a massive wave from the North Sea covered them from the north or south. At this point, we might be approaching an explanation for the distinctive rays and shapes of star fortresses. Imagine a tsunami of liquid clay approaching. Such a tsunami would move slowly but with immense destructive force, because it's 1.5 to 2 times denser than water. To withstand such a flow, you would need structures resembling a ship's bow to divide the flow, reducing its destructive force and directing it to the sides. Anyone who has worked with similar materials, such as liquid concrete, knows that once such a mixture enters a still area, it immediately begins to set and harden. Fresh waves bypass the hardened sections from all directions, including from above, due to the sheer mass of the flow. On a smaller scale, the mixture loses its fluidity and begins to solidify. To prevent this, in construction, the surface is first soaked with water before pouring concrete, and during the process, it's vibrated to keep it fluid and prevent premature setting. In the case of ramparts, walls help guide the mass into the moat, where the water facilitates its flow away from the fortress. For the same reason, fortresses along rivers often lack walls facing the water or have flat, straight walls. There's no need to slow the mass flowing directly into the river. This structure might offer a small chance of survival in such a disaster. Of course, this is only a hypothesis. However, notice how the surviving fortresses align with centers of civilization. Italy, clearly protected by the Alps, and Portugal, another mountainous region. The East, however, particularly Russia, Turkey, Kazakhstan, and Siberia, was not so fortunate. In the 7th volume of World Illustration from 1871, on page 169, there's an engraving of Mainz, Germany, showing the city surrounded by star-shaped fortifications. But in fact, these aren't fortresses. They're enormous fences with the characteristic star-shaped rays. High, around 10 meters, judging by the image, they completely surround the city. These structures are made of stakes supporting a fence, yet there are no signs of defensive equipment. There isn't even room for simple soldiers atop the palisade, let alone cannons. There's just no room for them there. Furthermore, the fortifications are so densely positioned, it's as if someone was desperately trying to protect against an unknown threat. Yet from the riverside, that is, from the water, the city is entirely unprotected. This might sound far-fetched, but how can we prove, for instance, that the Annenskaya fortress was buried rather than built like this from the start? It's quite simple. Just 130 kilometers from this fortress lies the city of Taganrog. We've discussed it many times, but I'm mentioning it now purely for convenience. Evidence of this kind is found almost everywhere. And since I'm often in Taganrog, it's a familiar example. Walking along the shore, you can find intriguing discoveries under the cliff. The clay erodes each year, periodically revealing layers hidden for centuries. One such example is at a depth of around 3 meters, where a brick wall and part of a street became visible after a cliff collapse. No, this isn't a basement. It's an actual street and bridge. There is red modern brick, our own. Taganrog is full of fascinating places like this. Unfortunately, I can't yet use a drone to get a closer look, because almost all of Taganrog's coastline is a no-fly zone. But even without a drone, what we see here is enough. In conclusion, star fortresses were built long before our civilization. Most likely, they served as wave breakers for clay flows, essentially functioning as bomb shelters against catastrophes. Judging by the sheer number of fortresses in Belgium and the Netherlands, they faced a literal sea of clay. Yet, the trend of these fortresses sinking into the ground, to the point of mere trenches or faint surface traces, especially moving eastward, suggests that many are still buried deep underground. And not just in Russia. For example, in central Spain, almost all of France, Turkey, and central Italy, similar structures are likely hidden. I estimate these foundations lie 10 to 15 meters or more below the surface. This means that artifacts from an earlier civilization may be buried beneath them. Of course, all of this might just be my imagination. Yet, starting in 2018, certain star fortresses in Europe, in France, Greece, and Italy, began to be plastered over and obscured on Google. Specifically, star fortresses. Why, I counted 16 such fortresses, though their number may grow. What work is being done there? What did they find? And why have these fortresses suddenly become strategic sites?